Despite Donald Trump's approval rating being the lowest of any modern-day president after 100 days, the only group that seems to have a worse approval rating are Democrats. How do we make it out of this?
We're the only Senate candidate in the whole country to beat a Republican in terms of trusting the border. You know, weakness shouts and strength whispers. Secretary Noem is a shouter for sure. You're using an FBI agent to go after a taco vendor. A lot of the guys that I served with voted for Donald Trump and are regretting it now. We're not supposed to think about men as I guess like a protected class, but we should at least be thinking of them as Americans. And people want to be rich, but they want it to be fair.
For many Americans, it feels like Democrats don't know how to win anymore. Senator Ruben Gallego of Arizona knows how to win. He was elected to the Senate in 2024, the same year Donald Trump got reelected to the presidency, and outperformed the Democratic national ticket by 8 points. Senator Gallego joins us to explain what Democrats can learn from his victory, his perspective on the U.S.-Mexico border, and how his time in the Marines shapes his time in Washington. Let's swear into the People's Cabinet, Senator Ruben Gallego. Senator Gallego, welcome to the People's Cabinet.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Hey, thank you for being here. So, despite Donald Trump's approval rating being the lowest of any modern-day president after 100 days, the only group that seems to have a worse approval rating are Democrats. Some ratings as low as 27%.
So basically down to family and friends.
Basically. You were elected senator, and you outpaced the Democratic ticket by 8 points. So my question to you first is, lead us out of the wilderness. How do we make it out of this?
Man, I would be I'd be a very powerful man if I could just snap my fingers and do that. I mean, just again, this is very simple. I think Democrats need to understand that we can't be out of the norm of everything where the normal voter is, right? And what does that mean? Like, it means a lot of things, but the most important thing is, like, listen to listen to what's going on.
You can say whatever you want.
Okay.
I got
listen
you.
to what's going on and listen to the voters. And there's some things you're going to hear that would have given you a clue what was happening. You know, in Arizona, it is a very swing state. And what we heard were voters that were unhappy about the cost of living and the border. And they were consistently saying it over and over again. And I think a lot of politicians were trying to be Pollyannish about what they were hearing instead of actually hearing it and trying to convince them, like, oh yeah, no, I'm good on this stuff. I'm going to fix it. Or like, hey, you're right. We messed up. Here's how we're going to fix it. You know, at the end of the day, voters get to vote. And if you don't give them, you know, at least enough of what they want, they're going to go look for something else. And it's weird. Like, I was talking to, you know, the voters are like, well, you know, Donald Trump's crazy, but I'd rather have crazy. Like, that's what people said. And I hope that we take lessons from this. You know, in order to win elections, we have to be popular. Like, that's a real thing, right? But yeah, I know that's groundbreaking stuff, but you'd be surprised how many people don't want to understand that.
And how much of that blame do you blame on the party not having a more effective message, and how much do you credit is the wrong word? Both leading up and then after the campaign, the Democrats not articulating their message enough, kitchen table issues, et cetera, versus the Republicans effectively framing.
Well, look, you look at the Republicans barely won. Let's be clear, right? They won a pretty good, I would say, popular votes, and it wasn't that surprising, but they barely won through the Electoral College, right? I think what happened was the Democrats did not want to do introspection and then have a campaign around that. Because if we had actually been honest with ourselves and actually listened to the voters, we would have had to admit that all of our efforts had not actually helped the working class as much as we hoped it had, right? And we did pass good bills. We did pass consequential bills. But if you actually talk to that base voter that was just not feeling it, we would have to admit that, like, you know what, maybe the stuff we did with the IRA just didn't reach them. It's not saying the IRA is bad, but it just didn't reach them, right? Maybe we have to admit to ourselves that, like, lowering the cost of, you know, food, gasoline, whatever it was something we intended to do, but we just weren't doing it, and it wasn't communicated. Like, it was a lot of things that we needed to admit to ourselves that I think we weren't willing to admit, and by doing that, we ended up running a campaign that was just out of step for where the voter was. Do you know what I'm saying?
And how were you orienting your message in Arizona itself? And
Yes.
the 8-point difference, were you surprised by that, or were you not surprised that there were a lot of Gallego Trump voters?
We were not surprised with a lot of Gallego Trump voters.
Why?
Because we heard it out there. The other thing is that the people fail to understand is that a Gallego Trump voter is not a Trump voter that decided to vote Gallego. A lot of them were Gallego voters decided to vote for Donald Trump, right? This isn't me hyping myself up, right, or anything like that. This is just a swing voter that connected with us, but just could not connect with the Harris campaign. We also had like a Green Party candidate that took 2.5% of our vote. So I thought my margins would be higher. I thought I did think the vice president would do better in Arizona. Towards the end, I felt that she was not going to win it, but I thought it would be closer. And but the Gallego Trump voter is largely apolitical. They don't watch TV shows. They don't read the news. They don't actually follow politics. And we designed an early campaign for that voter, not thinking that they were Gallego Trump voters, but we knew that they were these people that were worried about the economy, worried about the border, but they're not doing research. They're not going to Google my name and vote on it. They're going to be largely listening to other people, or just in general the vibes of what the hell's going on in the campaign or the election season. And so we tried to essentially run a campaign that was obviously going to the educated voter, and also at the same time run a campaign that can break through into the kind of the people that just vote on pure vibes.
And so you dropped an F-bomb in the first sentence or two of this interview, and
it's only one time though.
But you are known to be someone who just speaks like a normal person.
I try to be. Yeah.
I wanna probe that a little bit, because I think there's a lot of Democrats, especially in Washington, who are so buttoned up on their image.
Sure.
They're afraid to talk like you talk.
Right.
You tweeted about J.D. Vance, all ass, no class, when he was talking about President Biden's cancer diagnosis. Can you just talk about authenticity in the Democratic Party and how you felt like you were able to connect with voters in ways that maybe it's not commonplace here?
Well, because I'm on all the time, it's easier for me not to be on all the time. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to pretend to be somebody else when because I'm also fairly accessible. Like, when I go home, like, I go to my local restaurants, and I live in a very working class area. I go to my local grocery store. Like, I don't want to be on all the time. It's fucking tiring. Like, why would you want to do that? And so it's easier for me just to be who I am and bring politics to that versus the other way around, you know what I'm saying? And I think a lot of my colleagues have been trained to be on for so long that now they just don't know how to be themselves while conducting themselves in politics, right? And because politics has changed a lot, I think like that's very off-putting to people in general, to voters in general.
A demographic that you've talked a lot about are dudes. And that demographic in a large quantity shifted to Trump in the presidential election. Can you talk a little bit about your experiences of how you've communicated that group? And you've said things like, we shouldn't treat addressing and speaking directly to men as exclusionary of women,
yes,
right?
Correct.
And so I'd love to hear more about your thoughts on that.
Look, I think the Democratic Party moved away from this big tent mentality, which is one of the reasons why we won, and have started to getting more narrow. English is my second language. Narrower and narrower. And I think some of it is going to be hard. Look, we haven't won the male vote in quite a while, actually, to be clear. But now we're also starting to lose other demographics that we were winning, right? So the white male vote has been eluding us for a while. We started losing the black male vote, the Latino vote, the young male vote, which we used to get, actually went for Republicans. Now, you'll have politicians say it's because we're not cool. I mean, I'm not sure politics has ever been cool. I'm not sure politicians have ever been cool. I think they're in some ways they're not seeing anything from us, right? And some of that is, the male demographic is not doing great. If you just, if you were just looking at the data set of this group and just take sex out of it, they have lower graduation rates, lower college graduation rates. They're buying less homes, higher rates of suicide, higher rates of drug abuse, like all these things that if you saw and you ascribed it to a community that it's okay to care about. Us as policymakers are like, we should do something about this, right? But for some reason, we kind of, if it's involving males, we're like, right? And I think at some point, they're voters. They get to vote. Like, why don't we actually try to figure out what to do? Not just because we want their vote, but because they're also Americans, right? And like, we need to figure out like what's going on here. Like, what can we do to keep men? And this goes, by the way, for Black men, Latino men. This is something that's kind of cross-cultural. White men. What can we do to reduce their suicide rate? What can we do to make sure that they are able to go to college, graduate college, or some kind of program so they could actually get good jobs? Because guess what? We're better off as a country if the other 50% of our country has good paying jobs, has good college attainment, feels that they could go out and find a mate, get a house. Like, these are the things that like we don't really think about because we're not supposed to think about men as I guess like a protected class, but we should at least be thinking of them as Americans. And it's kind of taboo. It became kind of taboo within Democratic politics for some reason to think about men. And I just think that's weird too.
A related thing that you've talked to in the past, and I think it has the similar theme of things that Democrats need to address, and maybe because of the Democratic platform they've been afraid to, is different aspirations around men and aspirations around wealth, right?
Yeah.
And you've said, people want to get rich. They want to live the
I think
American
most
dream,
Americans
so-
want to get rich, whether it's men or women.
Right.
I just think like we don't really talk to people's aspirations anymore, and like especially for me, the son of immigrants. This is why my family came in this country, so they can be successful and be rich. And it's like, and I was trying to talk to my colleagues about this. They're like, oh, so we shouldn't attack Elon Musk. I'm like, no. Here's how this works. People want to be rich, but they want it to be fair. If Elon Musk is kind of screwing the system up, they're not going to give him forgiveness because he's rich, right? But like, we have to be the party that is going to say like, yeah, you may be starting at the bottom rung of life, but we're going to make sure that you have the opportunity to succeed, to be rich, to buy a house. Like, we really can't be ashamed of being the party of upward mobility, because we have been forever. This is why we emphasize public schools, like doing a lot of programs and public programs to help people out of poverty, but we never say what the reason is, right? The reason is because we want you to have a chance to be wealthy, to be secure. It went from that to we're the party of equity, which is great, but like, what's the goal of equity if there is no what's the overall outcome of that, right? So like, why do I want to provide food stamps? Well, of course I want people to go hungry. Well, it's also because I want you to have a chance to fucking study, not worry about, food so you can take care of your children. It's all these things that we just aren't kind of like connecting the last node to. I guess is the way I would put it.
Another area that I think Democrats are still trying to figure out is the border. You've been very thoughtful about this, obviously coming from a border state. In this podcast, we try to not assume that people have done the deep research on certain things.
Yes.
So I'd love for you to just explain what the crux of the controversy is at the border, and then what you've proposed.
Well, one of the first things I recognized as a Democrat, as a border state Democrat, is how many Democrats did not actually understand the border.
Yep.
The other thing is there's a lot of Republicans that also don't understand the border. And there's a lot of really conservative Republicans from other states that demonize the border, and then there's also a lot of Democrats from liberal-leaning states that make it seem that there's no problem at the border, right? And so the reason we, towards the end of our campaign, well, at the end of the campaign, when they asked people that voted in 2024 who they trusted more on the border was either me or Carrie Lake, we won that. We're the only Senate candidate in the whole country to beat a Republican in terms of trusting the border. And the reason we did that is because we had a very realistic, Arizona-centric border perspective that we talked to our constituents about, our voters about, versus my opponent, Carrie Lake, seemed like her perspective of the border was coming from kind of like East Coast political consultants. Like, she showed up at the border with a handgun and next to the border wall. Like, look, come on, Arizona's no better. Why do you have a handgun next to the border wall? You're already there with security. We send our kids down to Rocky Point, which is the nearest beach to Arizona. It's in Mexico. That's not what's happening. Are there problems at the border? Sure, yes. What we saw, what this administration did with, the millions of people allowed to cross and ask for asylum was horrific.
And can you take people through just like a case example of what the crux of the controversy was? I know it's very complicated.
It's very complicated.
I'd rather have you explain it than somebody from,
Okay, so let's talk about what was occurring and then what the perspective of it was. And so we have time, so it's just good, right? So essentially, under Trump 1, it kind of became known within the, I would say, world population of people that want to come to the United States, that if you come to the United States and ask for asylum, you will get a hearing. And you could go just to the border and do that. And it just started getting bigger and bigger, and people started figuring that out. And the infrastructure for asylum hearings fell behind even further and further. So it went from 1 to 2 years, it went to 5 years. In that time period, till you get your first asylum hearing, you get a work permit.
And asylum is essentially saying that you feel like you have faced persecution in your home country.
Your home country, yes. And the standards for it are vary, but it should be because of religious reasons, political violence, not economic reasons, or violence of some sort. And so, because we have that standard by law, they come to the border. There is no asylum judge at the border, so they just basically get a hearing at some point. And that hearing kept on growing and growing. And so the word got out across the world, starting with Trump 1, and then going into Biden, because essentially Trump used COVID under Title 42 to shut down anyone going to the border and asking for asylum. So that actually did stop it, but what it did is it just created a lot of people waiting at the border. President Biden came in and lifted Title 42. Some of it was judicial reasons, everything else like that. One of the things that a lot of us warned from border states, because we saw what was waiting on the other side, was do not lift Title 42 without a plan to deal with this, because you're just going to have people rushing the border. And so he lifted Title 42, and that basically started the process where millions of people started coming to the border and asking for asylum. The administration responded in law by saying, well, here's your asylum slip, and that just kept on growing. It came to the point where, for example, in Arizona, we had men flying from Senegal to Europe, Europe to Brazil, Brazil to, we think it was Cancun, Cancun to Tijuana, using actual travel agents, not US-based, travel agents do all of this. And in Tijuana, they would organize themselves with other Senegalese, negotiate with a coyote.
There's a whole industry around it.
It's a whole industry around it. And they would go to the border spots where they knew they were handing out even longer and longer work permits. These men would sell everything in Senegal, cars, take out loans, everything else like that, because they know if they get here and then get into that process, they'll be here for 5-7 years. So taking out a $10,000 loan when you get to work for free, not work for 5-7 years, it's a good economic trade-off. It got to the point where Mexican airlines started adding routes between southern Mexico and northern Mexico, right? So this got bad. It got really, really, really bad. Now, the president should have not let it start when lifting Title 42, but it got worse. And so a lot of us were telling him, you need to do something, right? And so there's temporary ways to do this. There's empowering people like asylum judges, hire more asylum judges, everything else like that. And it just didn't happen. And for the longest time, the vision of people, and it's not like one or two people, but hundreds of thousands of people rushing the borders, and then seeing the effect of it, and then seeing the effect of it spilling over into our cities, that eventually erodes people's trust. The president eventually did make the right decision, but it was far too late.
And can you tell, just again, I think that there's a lot of conversation about the border from people who have no tangible constituents or stories about it.
Yeah.
It would just be really, I think, important for our listeners to hear stories that you hear from your constituents,
sure,
especially in the border towns, both on the why we need border control, but then also the humanity around, what the Trump administration is.
Yeah, and also the humanity. It's totally two different things. What's happening at the border right now under Trump is what the border communities wanted. They wanted less people coming to the border and asking for asylum because those border communities, these are largely very, very Latino communities, they make their money off border trade, right? Their businesses, their factories, their tourism. When these asylum seekers came through, what happened is a lot of the border security, as well as the Customs Border Police, basically shut down their efforts for kind of normal trade and migration to handle the asylum cases and process them. And so business was leaving these small towns, and they're entirely reliant on this business coming in. And then they were also draining the system. So what usually would happen is Border Patrol or Customs would process these men and women, and then they would just release them. Now imagine if you're a town like San Luis. San Luis is a town about 6,000 on the border. Border Patrol gets a couple thousand people. They process them that day. They just release them into the town. And San Luis is probably about 30 minutes away from Yuma. Yuma is the biggest city in the county. And even then, that's not that big of a city. And from there, the biggest city is probably a 3-hour drive in Phoenix, Arizona. So imagine if you're a small town, doesn't matter how good-natured you are, you have a lot of strangers now roaming around, and there's no place to put them. They're just creating this chaos. So when Biden started, towards the end of his administration in July, with a crackdown, June, July, with a crackdown on the border, as in basically giving the power to Border Patrol to deny people asylum on the spot, it started slowing down. And security started coming back to the border. There's more border trade that was more deliberative and predictable. And the street releases, it's called, were a lot less. Trump comes in and continues that. And so now illegal crossings and people coming to the border asking for asylum are almost down to zero. And what that has done is these communities are happy now, right? They like the border trade that's coming through. They feel, they don't see the masses of people around them that they don't know. And in that regard, they're happy. Now, what's happening across the country, and even to some degree in these areas, the mass deportations, they don't like. Because that's not what they felt they voted for. They don't like the fact that people that were protected are now arbitrarily said they're not protected, right? Workers with work permits, people with visas, green cards, things of that nature. And they're not happy that even people that are here legally but have no major criminal records are being deported because they think that they should be able to stay here. And what the president is doing is really becoming unpopular with a lot of these people because that's the one area where they thought there should be some compromise, right? And so my position on all of this is like the Democratic position should be fairly simple, right? And because I think it's actually more humane. Let's do everything we can to keep illegal border crossings down to zero. Let's figure out a way to make sure people don't want to come to the border and ask for asylum, tighten up those asylum laws, let them claim asylum through other processes in other countries, hire more border judges, more asylum judges to make decisions faster, but then also, figure out a way to get these people that are here, that have community roots, how do we get them to stay here, right? How to make, in like two communities I think that deserve a chance to be citizens is, Dreamers and the spouses of U.S. citizens. And then on a more, kind of most likely to happen legislative level is let's give everyone else some type of permanency here, a visa that allows them to stay in this country, work, pay taxes, and be able to contribute, but not be at the risk and mercy of the administration coming and changing them. And who knows, maybe the future politics changes, they'll have an opportunity to move. But what I'm trying to get that is like, we are not ever gonna have a country full of no immigrants, and we should figure out how to keep those that are here, legalize them, and then also have a very flexible way to bring in new workers so we're not avoiding this. Now, some of this stuff is controversial. Like I have an E-Verify program. People will say, well, you can't do that. I'm like, well, if you have a very good guest worker program and you shut down the border and you legalize everyone that's in this country, whether they get to become citizens or they get to keep their stay here as residents, then E-Verify is really going to only catch the really bad apples. But this is the territory that I think Democrats have to move to. This, by the way, is very reminiscent of what the Democratic position had been under Obama and Clinton, and I think that's something that we could point to. Like we are for safe communities, a safe border, humane treatment of those that have been living in the shadows here, and then making sure that people get to we have a flexible guest worker permit that meets the demand of the economy.
So can you talk about the pageantry that's been surrounding all of this? Your proposal seems very pragmatic and practical, but then you just were with Secretary Noem talking about her $50 million jet. You were very famously criticizing her for the way she held her gun with the scene that was completely wrong. She's flew down to El Salvador, standing in front of prisoners at CCOT.
It's disgusting.
Can you just, as someone who is talking to constituents every day and understands, again, both what needs to be solved, but also the humanity about people, family separation, et cetera, how you react to when you see Secretary Noem doing these things?
Which is unprofessional. Like, it's important to be in the Marines, they teach you to be a quiet professional, right? You don't have to be allowed to be tough, right? You don't have to be cruel in order for you to be effective. And the fact is, they're cruel and they're not effective. And at the end of the day, this is why you see these like overt like show of force that end up costing a ton of money, right? And they're sending people to Guantanamo, and I think there was only 360 of them or something like that, and then they brought them back. That alone cost $21 million, right? All these things that you could do in a smart way to actually go after the bad people that they claim they're going to go after. But, I guess cruelty is the point, to really keep their base happy. Because at the end of the day, they're not going to be able to accomplish what they want. They won't be able to deport, 8 to 10 million, 12 million undocumented people in this country. So instead, they're just going to waste money and not even bring us more security, right? So I give them credit for giving security at the border. It's not really sustainable the way they do it, but if they change their ways, there are ways to do it. But now they're pulling off FBI agents. They're pulling off like other agents that are like investigating child porn, money laundering. They're pulling off ATF agents, FBI agents, and not making other U.S. citizens safer, right? You're using an FBI agent to go after a taco vendor, or you see 12. There's I saw something in your old neck of the woods, Worcester, Mass. I think I counted 12 agents to swarm on a woman. What do you I get it for high value targets that could be potentially dangerous, but what does it say that you need that many agents to take down one woman who, from what I understand, doesn't not even have a criminal record. So, it shows a lot. I mean, weakness, weakness shouts and strength, is whispers. And Secretary Noem is a shouter for sure.
You made a reference to your time in the Marines, and first and foremost, I found it fascinating about your biography that you enlisted, and you were not an officer. And I think obviously there's a lot of people who military.
It's not that. I literally did that. They didn't want me to become an officer.
I want to hear the story about your decision to enlist, because I think most people don't really understand. First of all, can you explain the difference between officer track and enlisted track, and then secondly, your decision to do that?
Yeah, so most people that have college degrees become an officer. I did not have my college degree yet, so I joined the reserves, right? And I enlisted in the reserves really because I did want to serve, right? I felt like I wanted to at least give something back to this country as a son of immigrants. It's the best country in the world. I would never, ever, ever have succeeded as much as I have if I had been born in Colombia or Mexico, right? Because my family does not come from wealth. They don't come from wealth over there. And I always felt like a sort of a very strong pull of patriotism to service this country. Now, this is in the Clinton era of time, and I guess I could have gone active duty, but I also thought this is a good step. Be reservist, see if you enjoy it, and then you can move on from there.
And can you talk about how that background has informed what you're doing now, putting holds on nominees and the cuts you're seeing at the VA?
Fast forward, I joined the infantry, and just because if you enjoy the Marines, you might as well do infantry. That's my opinion. So I did. And fast forward, 5 years after that, I end up being in a very a unit that saw a lot of combat. And, I saw my best friend die, friends die, a lot of friends die, unfortunately. And then we came back just really wounded, broken. The VA was not ready for us. And I found myself being kind of an unofficial VA counselor to a bunch of veterans. It's kind of what eventually propelled me into politics. And talking to, in the years, and still talking to the men I serve with, these guys are like family to me. Like I text with them almost every day. And this administration come in saying they're going to cut 83,000 VA employees without any plan. They're not telling us who they're going to cut, how they're going to cut, how they make a decision, how's this going to affect, real shit. How's this really going to affect veterans and their services? And I know I had problems getting my services in my younger days. Like, I was really worried about that. And so I'm on the VA committee, and they want to start coming through with other VA political appointees, and I just couldn't just stand there and not do anything. I only have a couple cards to play in the minority, and this is the one. And all I'm asking for them is show me your plan. Who is getting cut? Who are the 83,000 people they're going to cut? Because the cuts start July 1st, by the way. So we're almost, less than a month and 2 weeks away from these cuts being effective. And they can't tell us who they're cut. They can't tell why they're cutting them. What's the plan? Explain to me how this isn't going to affect services. Because we've been trying to get more people to work for the VA, and the problem has always been that we need more, not less. And now all of a sudden they're just changing around. So that's why I'm holding them. I'm holding all their nominations. And if they want those nominations to move forward more, then explain to us exactly how this is going to affect that veteran.
My last question for you is, this is a time where I think there's a lot of scared people out there, a lot of people who are nervous about what Trump's going to do in the next hour, let alone day or week. There are people that I know you've talked about in town halls, and I know you've talked actively to people who have voted for Trump in 2024 and continue to try to bring them into the tent.
Well, a lot of the guys that I served with voted for Donald Trump and are regretting it now.
And what is your advice to people listening who know those people in their communities? What's the one line or message you'd give to them?
Don't be a snob. Don't tell them I told you so. It'll make you feel better maybe, but do we want to win? Do we want to save this democracy? Do we want to save this country? Then, talk to them. And talk to them from a perspective of, like, as a fellow American, as a friend. I think that's the most important thing. And by the way, they're not going to agree with you on everything about Trump. They're not going to be something like go from, man, I really, liked him, to now, man, I really hate him on all this. They're going to probably still like some of the stuff he's doing, right? And it could be on anything. But, learn to work with what you got. And, you'd be surprised. Like, some of my veterans, my guys, they're really unhappy about the VA. They're really unhappy about the firing of federal workers that are veterans. And they're fine with what's happening at the border and immigration. But, we're able to get them to move in our direction. These guys are voting Democratic in 2026 because of what Trump is doing. Now, Trump's not running again, but that tells you. Now, if I came to him see, I told you so, ha, 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 that's not going to get them. And that means our guys aren't, the blue team won't win in 2026. So, focus on winning. Bigger tent, that means you have to bring in, Trump voters that maybe they're seeing a little on the light. So don't be afraid of letting them in, and don't be afraid of, treating them like, normal Americans.
Senator Gallego, thank you for coming on the People's Cabinet. Appreciate it.
Cigars next time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the People's Cabinet. If you did, please like, subscribe, ring that bell, and put in the comments below who else you'd like to see sworn in. And stay tuned for new episodes every Tuesday. Let's go.